Hey, welcome back to Airlayers Bonsai. Hope you're doing well. Today I just want to do a little video on winter protection of our outdoor trees and how we can kind of aid them through the depths of winter. We're just going into meteorological winter here now in England, and we've seen a few minuses already, you know, sort of 1 or 2. Nothing too damaging to the trees, although ironically, trying to film part of this video yesterday, I was hindered by my vehicle not working down to the cold. And then today we have the polar opposite, we have mild and wet. But that adds even more relevance into this video as such. With the wet, cold, or cold then wet, sorry, and then cold again next week, you know, it's good to kind of check in on our trees, make sure things are as we actually want them to be, or as they should be, best practice as it were. And they're not sitting soaking wet, exposed. You know, there's still at this point, like I said, after a few little cold snaps, there's still things we can do to make sure we don't fall foul to this. So mostly trees that we've picked to grow as outdoor bonsai are normally quite tough, you know, as actual mature trees as such. They grow into grand things, you know, survive centuries and can deal with severe cold, no problem. But as soon as we start sort of working them and put them into small pots, that winter hardiness does take a knock, and especially with things like this cedar, which, like I say, would normally grow into a grand tree relatively unscathed by cold. This in a small pot, for instance, really doesn't do well if it gets too cold, even in a well-drained soil. I saw last year on numerous internet posts about, you know, people that had blue cedars looking a bit anemic in springtime, needles dropping, no real sign of recovery or you know, bud swelling or, you know, extension, and a slow kind of progression to a bare tree and, you know, no longer alive. But I've lost a couple of cedar airlayers at this point. I see a couple of mature trees being lost and, you know, various other projects in between, and we couldn't have all done the same thing wrong in the pot, so you can only assume that, you know, that was the winter temperatures that kind of took the toll on this particular species. But as we know, a tough tree. The same can be said for oak. I lost a couple of those last year. Elm, maples, you know, you can lose twiggy branches on those if you leave them exposed to the cold winds. And again, the pot sitting wet, frozen, wet, frozen, you know, these are things we want to kind of keep an eye on and check in if we can. So the best preparation that we could have actually made for our bonsai going into winter really would have been the spring or the spring prior, especially if we had the opportunity to repot our trees. Maybe that wasn't in your control, maybe something you bought this year, but again, this video will still obviously hold purpose for you, hopefully. It's really in the repotting process anyway, that, you know, that would have been the best start to our trees going into winter. Given a free draining, well-structured mix, half the battle's already kind of been won there. I have a couple of little examples here of kind of what we mean by that. Right, so here are a couple of examples of a well-drained open structure soil. This little juniper in one of my cement pots I did as a short back in the summer. It survived all the hot weather really well, and it's been out for a couple of frosts now. The pot's held up okay, and the soil has as well, so pretty happy with how that's gone. And you can go back if you want to see the makeup of that soil in that short. Here's an example of a plant sitting in maybe not the ideal soil mixture. Obviously this kind of algae plant life on the top here is kind of a good indicator that maybe the soil's a little bit heavy and sitting a little bit wet. Now this plant might not survive a cold, long, wet winter, and especially being a Japanese maple, if I use the kind of knowledge of my garden centre days in horticulture, if you like, we'd have a lot of customers coming in spring saying that half their Japanese maple had died off, and they'd maybe just potted it in a garden compost, you know, a general purpose kind of thing, and it sat too wet. And commonly with Japanese maple, outside of bonsai, it, you know, and substantially quite a bit thicker than this one as well, if they do sit too wet and get too cold over winter, although it doesn't really always kill the plant off, you actually get quite a bit of dieback. And if this was branched out more, you actually end up with this kind of result at the top here. this part here, but along a lot more of the tree and sometimes some quite dominant branches. And that's just in the garden variety. So again, if you're putting this thing into a small pot, that's only going to exacerbate the problem. So we want to be mindful of things like this. So there's an example of good soil, and nothing wrong with it for growing soil, but not great for small pots. So to the solution part of this video, what am I doing for my bonsai collected material, starter projects, going into the depths of winter? Now I'm very lucky to have this cold greenhouse to store the majority of my bonsai young material projects in, as it were. Although, like I say, most of these trees are fully outdoor trees, don't really require being grown in greenhouses or anything like that. This is a cold greenhouse. You know, we have windows and doors and odd bits missing. It just kind of keeps the biting winds off it, and helps reduce the kind of impact of wet. So while I have this facility, I'm going to make the most of it, and obviously if it gives me a little tiny couple of week window early to start repotting works, then that's great as well. But not everyone has this facility, so shortly in the video I'll explain other little tips and tricks how we can get around some of these problems, and certainly myself, when I take a lot of this material home next year, I'll be living by my own advice, as it were. Now, the preparation for me in this greenhouse really was just really cleaning up the trees, little brush over the bottom, defoliating anything that's ready. I do like to leave the trees outside until they've had the cold on them, they've kind of shut down properly for winter. Like I say, these are outdoor trees, they don't want to be in your living room or anything like that. It has to be a cold environment that you store them in. But yeah, I like to kind of let them go through their natural process, as it were, and shut down naturally, and then clean them up and bring them in. And I've actually arranged them quite nicely for a tour video in maybe a week or two's time, so hopefully that will have a bit more of a journey around it than the usual kind of bittiness. So although, like I say, I'm very lucky to have the facility, some of you might find that you actually have a cold greenhouse or even an unheated conservatory that might serve very much the same purpose. And anything that you are slightly doubtful of, you know, if it's an unheated environment and you've got it, I just put pretty much everything in there. But that given, the trees have shut down, cleaned them up, packed them away. One other side note, if you're using that kind of method, if you like, or facility, is just pest control as well. Just making sure that, again, the leaves were either defoliated or dropped beforehand. It's good practice in a way. Once you've got a greenhouse pest free, you don't want to be bringing in aphids and things like that on leaves. They really do well a few degrees above freezing, as it were, so it does exacerbate problems like that. And certainly with things like pines and junipers, bringing those into even sort of, you know, +1 or 0 sort of environments, if they do have any kind of mealybug or scale, again, it becomes obvious on pines and junipers if you bring them in. So really with those, if the weather's really severe, bring them in, but any other time, really, outside's probably the best for that. So what can we do if we haven't got an unheated greenhouse, a cold frame, a conservatory, various things like that? There is a number of things we can actually do, simple things as well, to kind of aid this. Just simply picking a plant up off of a display bench and putting down nearer to ground level can aid in a few degrees. It won't stop much in the wet, and be careful with drips where you do actually place these plants, but it can give you a couple of degrees protection again. Another simple one really as well, if we had pots as well like we have here, like my bad example of soil mix earlier, a pot like this sitting on the deck there on a solid surface, it has a low gravity column there in the pot as well, so the water isn't being forced out massively at the bottom. It might sit wet, and we already established that the soil isn't great. And if we had imagined this was maybe a bigger pot as well, just simply putting it up on something, a couple of old bits of wood, whatever you can find, just gives it a little bit of a way to get out there. Now obviously, good quality bonsai pots do come with little feet on. This is one I've actually made, so we don't know if we can class it as a good quality bonsai pot, but this is a cement pot, and as I say, a good quality bonsai pot will normally have little feet kind of moulded on already, and that obviously naturally keeps it off the ground there, and allows, you know, more kind of sitting water to get away from it. But it wouldn't hurt again even to have a pot like that up off the ground really. You know, if you have got a fancy pot, you don't want to really just put it through an enduring winter for the sake of it as well. So even the pot might get a little bit of a break from surface water sitting around the bottom there and just kind of the freeze-thaw action. So there's a couple of little simple things, and again that at the bottom of a bench, opposed to on top of it, will just cut down on the exposure a little bit. So we have a number of smaller little trees as well, but we don't want to have them all sitting on little bits of wood and all that chaos. You know, pots like this might be okay on a little piece of wood, might not seem excessive, but for smaller little pots that we maybe want to keep just above the ground and keep the water away from the bottom of them. Things like these old bread baskets, you know, you do see these getting thrown away at various garden centres and shops. Keep your eyes peeled, but they're obviously, you know, well drained at the bottom there. And we can just sit little pots in those, bunch them together. Again, there's our badly drained soil. You know, if you're worried about pots clashing around, your little bits of wood can come back in here again. And you can pack out little trays of these things and again put them down at the bottom of the bench. And you know, a bit like penguins huddled together, might stand a little bit, you know, stand up to a little bit more of a lower temperature. So another little, you know, thing, and again, easier to kind of move around that collection of little trees there and get them in and out of bad weather conditions. Now the last kind of little simple things I showed you there, they do make a difference, and you know, it's well worth making these little adjustments as we go into the depths of winter. Because like I say, there's a saying, better late than never. The kind of cut off for that is when the -5, 6 approaches, and we've had kind of, you know, horrible wet weather with it. So better late than never, but you know, definitely get on with it. And a couple of other little ideas I've had as well that may help you and will probably help me next year when I have to relocate some of this. Hypothetically speaking, this was a white piece of horticultural fleece. It's a product quite cheaply available from probably most garden centres, supermarket, online, you know, should be plenty of outlets for it. It's not always the greatest thing to be just draping over a finished bonsai as such, because you may do damage to the sticks there at the end. It can be handy stuff. You know, a couple of layers of this, or one layer of this, sorry, is meant to add plus 3 or 4 degrees. So if you're at -3 or 4, you should be still okay. So 2 layers of that, which should see you ample for -5, right? And then, you know, to add to that, because like I say, we wouldn't want to really just drape that over our plants. There's a little idea I did kind of have, and for those of us that can't have greenhouses, permanent structures, cold frames, or maybe don't want a cold frame kicking around the garden all spring, and I've seen this happen. I even found these little, I'd had them for a little while now. I found these little cane connectors. Probably a cheap thing again off of kind of Amazon or eBay, but you know, you could look at constructing a little, this is quite crudely done, I wouldn't, you know, rate it too much on that front, but as an example to you guys, you know, you could build something like that, a much bigger scale, have a few, you know, wire in a few braces and things over it. You know, you could amend this design a bit, the structural engineer, and this will come out at this point, but you could brace this up, drape a few layers of fleece over it. And if your plants are in those totes as well, you know, you've given them a really good chance there. And this is something relatively cheap that most people could actually, you know, put together if you were really struggling. You know, back at home, things like the white pine over here, you know, I'd just bring that in on a really bad cold night, or if we had several. My house isn't very warm, you know, we live in an old 1800s cottage. If the heating isn't on, you really know about it. It's probably colder inside than it is out. So things like that, you know, on a small scale, we can make little adjustments like that. You know, it wouldn't hurt the plant at all, but certainly do not want to be bringing pines or outdoor plants. And even for decoration, you know, they don't like you know, dry, warm environments, especially when they're kind of shut down for winter, as it were. So as a little recap here, hypothetical bench there. Best practice, as it were, we can bring the plants down to a lower point, keeping them off the ground if possible. Something I could have added earlier as well, if we're going to cover over the whole plant, there's nothing wrong again if you're going above and beyond, and certainly this would have helped with my cedar Airlayers. You could wrap the pot there like that, our structure, whatever it may be. This was an example I give you here of something I've kind of created. If I can just get that actually to fit on the bench. And then obviously our horticultural fleece, if we were going to, a couple of layers of that wrapped all the way around, but I'll leave it open so you can see. And that would have given us, you know, -4 or 5 degrees protection there, with no worries whatsoever. Just quickly as well, while we're on this subject, so I didn't mention it earlier, the air layers that I've got here. Now normally these would be outside on a tree. Obviously you might not always have them in a potted plant, you know, so mobile as these are. I've left one wrapped and one unwrapped, but again, same as the pot there. I've just put a bit of bubble wrap around it, and just to give it a few more degrees. You could go a couple of layers. Mindful things with air layers this time of year, they do not want to sit soaking wet. So this is a good example here, this cedar. You can see a little bit of residual condensation in the shrink wrap there. Tells me there's a bit of moisture in there. And that would be about perfect really. You know, in summer we'd be borderline dry, but right now with severe cold on the way and only getting worse, this is ideal. And you can see I actually, I held off cutting this one. I'm going to do it in spring, but I'm sure I could have done it in autumn. But this is full of roots now and they're starting to push through the plastic and really gather up all the way around. So quite looking forward to opening that up in spring. So that's just a little bit on air layers there. Not too wet. Wrap them up if you can and make sure that the seal at the top where the gravity feeds the water in is good. And I also find as well a bit of black plastic around them, a bit thicker gauge as well. Just will kind of help control the animals. They seem to really like to have a look at what's in them. They obviously soon realise there's nothing good in there, but it doesn't stop them tearing them open and kind of ruining your air layer. And the water and the cold really do get in. So yeah, really you know, a little recap there for it. And then we'll move on to something, just preparation really into spring. While we're frozen out of other work, as it were, excuse the pun, there is little things we can be doing even in the depths of winter. I myself am actually preparing already now because I'm actually making some of the products for it. I'm preparing like some soil mixes that I'll be using in my own little concrete pots. You know, this isn't maybe a commercially viable way of doing it or someone who's looking to make money out of the operation. Just something I enjoy doing. So I've got my crushed brick there. That's a wood-fired brick here we use for English heritage buildings. I've done an experiment with junipers this year and it's gone rather well, so I'm keen to use that in other plantings this year. I'm just getting the grading right now. The last time I used it maybe a little bit too big, so that's a bit more realistic. I have my own little fired clay pellets here in the wood fire at home in a baked bean can. So these are kind of cool because they're all the same clay but different exposures or you know, setting in the fire is giving slightly different colours, so that's kind of cool for decorative use as well as it does absorb water. I've grown a little Japanese maple in it and I've left it out all winter to actually get an honest response of how this stuff behaves over winter and you know how it does a little seedling as it were. A lot smaller than even that one I showed you earlier. And it did make the leaves on that maple a really vivid red all year and the plant was actually healthy and was quite tolerant of the sun as well. So that's really interesting, and that's a local clay just dug up, torn crudely into various different shape sizes, and then just fired in my fireplace at home. This here looks like just a normal lump of charcoal. This isn't your B&Q special or anything alike or instant light. This is some charcoal again I've made myself. It's just hardwood charcoal, no additives in it or anything. This is something I'm going to try and add a little, maybe 10% into my potting mix next year. But it's another video I'm going to do because this isn't the you know, the finalisation of what I'm doing with this here. This is just a raw product, if you like. So there's a few little things I'm getting on with, and that can lead on to you guys, you know, being prepared for your potting mix, getting pots ready, cleaning pots, making a new bench maybe, you know, or planning something like that. But certainly the medium for potting, always worth kind of gathering it up a little bit early. The seasons don't always dictate, you know, the 5th of March will be great for potting, you know, it might be earlier, it might be later or whatever. So it's good to have this stuff in the bank and ready to go. Probably going to be inflationary beaten if you bought it early anyway. This stuff very rarely goes down, just tends to go up. So another little bit of financial advice there maybe. So there's some things I'm working on there, but certainly with our trees again as well, as we get into the depths of winter, we don't really want to be working them if we can avoid it. You know, things maybe like some of my little pines and that mature pine, I'll maybe start wiring as we come out of the depths of winter, heading out into spring. I'll maybe start doing bits like that. But more I'll be looking at my plants, observing it, thinking what's worked, what doesn't look right, what isn't in scale, what maybe can I improve. You know, structure and design really is that, and at the moment I'm quite enjoying just kind of drawing awkward material and then drawing new tops and different things, so that helps kind of scale down in your mind before you come to bending this stuff around and playing with it. And then just general health of our trees, as the whole video has obviously gone over there, winter protection. But while they're in, you know, while in between frost and bad weather, we can just be looking over them again. And you know, if I just bring the camera in closer here, there's examples on my old dad's sycamore here, where we just got moss and things building up here and then the berry, you know, and some of it's quite nice, but we maybe don't want all of it, so we can just get a little wooden chopstick. And jobs like this, you know, we can still do this time of year, and it's good to probably take that moisture retention away from the trunk, especially if you've got bark that, you know, you maybe want to preserve and not let it get soft and weathered. So things like that, you know, there's little jobs we can do. So yeah, really just planning and preparation. Well, thanks for watching. I hope that's been a useful video to some folk, especially the beginners in bonsai. But it's a message that, you know, we all can benefit from really. Even myself, like I say, I'm perfectly honest with it. There's certain years we get complacent, we get warm weather. Certainly going back to my garden centre days again, we see it in sales of phormiums, cordylines, you know, various sort of semi-tender plants. You'd have a sort of boom over it for a couple of years, and then we get a cold winter and ground zero for everyone. So, you know, it's a message that we can't hear enough maybe, and I hope, like I say, this video does provide some little tips and tricks for you to help nurse your bonsai and starter material through the winter. So if you have enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up. Really, it'll help push it out to other like-minded people. If you're a new viewer, maybe you consider subscribing. It'll help us grow the channel on also. And I'll see you in the next one.